Hey everybody, RHINO here, the world's strongest pro bodybuilder. Well, today's rant is about why I'm a hypocrite. Now you might think from the title that this rant is about steroids, but you'd be wrong. I competed in the NPC and the IFBB, and I competed in non-tested federations. If everyone's using performance-enhancing drugs, then the playing field is level, and there's nothing hypocritical about that. Of course, genetics also plays a huge role in an athlete's potential, but nobody has any control over their genetics. So it's a waste of time to discuss that, other than to recognize that certain genetic predispositions lend themselves better to certain sports. If you're 5'6" and becoming a center in the NBA may pose a problem. And likewise, if you're 6'5", then becoming an Olympic gymnast is equally unlikely. So you'd be wise to choose a sport for which your genetics are best suited if the intention is to make it your profession. Although I don't think I had a particular genetic advantage for bodybuilding or powerlifting, considering the fact that I was a $135 in college and I couldn't bench my body weight. I just really enjoyed lifting. Now beyond that, all that's left is lots and lots of discipline, consistency, and hard work. Eating, sleeping, and training. Here's where I'll readily admit I've been a hypocrite. You see, for many years now, I've been hosting seminars, writing articles, training athletes, and posting videos talking about how important it is to optimize every aspect of training, nutrition, and recovery, which includes sleep and therapy. The problem is, I've had a significant advantage over the vast majority of people I've been competing against and preaching to. I realized most of my success when I returned to competition in 2006. At that time and throughout my return to competition, I had unlimited time and resources to commit to the pursuit of my goals. Where most people have a full-time job, I did not. Where most people have kids, I did not. Where most people have financial constraints, I did not. I often get credited for having become an IFBB pro and setting world records while running multiple successful businesses. The fact of the matter is, I didn't. My businesses were already successful before I returned to competition. I actually stopped competing back in 1997 after over 10 years of trying to become a pro. From 1985 to 1997, I competed dozens of times at the state, regional, and national level, and I didn't come anywhere close to getting my pro card. Me and 20 other guys were 16th at the USA's. Back when I was a full-time college student and worked 2 jobs to pay for school, I trained at 5 a.m. in the morning, and I worked construction in the evenings and on weekends. I ate breakfast at the dormitories every morning and packed a bunch of hard-boiled eggs, chicken breasts, and PB&J sandwiches into Tupperware or Ziploc baggies, and grabbed a couple of cartons of whole milk to eat and drink during classes. I always tried to sit way in the back of the lecture halls, but when I cracked open that buck of hard-boiled eggs, everyone within 50 feet would turn and wrinkle their nose at me. Oftentimes I'd have to study late, or I'd be in the science library, scrolling through microfiche for hours, pursuing my obsession with nutrition or training-related research, so I'd only get 4 or 5 hours of sleep before I'd have to be up to train again, because God knows you'd never miss a workout. The internet didn't exist when I was in college, and I didn't have access to all the research and videos that are so readily available today. I've often said that if I knew then what I know now, I'd have been much more successful as a bodybuilder and powerlifter. But that's not altogether true, because I've come to realize that the further you climb up that competitive ladder, the more time and money it takes to get any higher. This is the quandary of most athletes. Olympic hopefuls, UFC fighters, boxers, amateur and most professional athletes in low-paying sports are often hindered by a lack of time and money, held back by prior personal, family, and financial commitments, distractions, inadequate facilities, equipment, and coaching. When I finished college, I worked full-time for a paltry $10 an hour and spent weekends distributing sports supplements throughout Oregon and Washington. I was finally able to train more, sleep more, and eat more. And as a result, I made a lot more progress. I fattened myself up to almost 300 pounds at one point and totaled over 2,000 pounds in my first 3-lift powerlifting meet back in 1996. I also pulled 782 pounds raw in competition with no belt in 1997. But that's all I did. Work, eat, sleep, train. I never went out. I never drank. I never missed a workout or a meal. My entire life revolved around bodybuilding and powerlifting. Then one day in 1997, I had a reality check. I used to train with IFBB pro Aaron Madron, who's an absolute freak. Enormous, full, round arms over 21 inches, quads over 32 inches, calves were over 21 inches. And he looked incredible. Long muscle bellies, great sweeps, thick veins running through his biceps and legs. He even graced the cover of Muscle and Fitness and a number of other magazines. Even though I had trained and competed with Aaron since he was 18 years old, we were posing one day after training and it just hit me like a wave. No matter how hard I worked, I was never going to look like that. And although I loved training, competing in bodybuilding and powerlifting would never be a career. I was 30 years old and broke. But hey, I had a room full of plastic trophies. So I made a decision right there to stop competing and start focusing on my career. It was an aha moment for me, the beginning of my future. Although I continued lifting, I cut down to 2 or 3 workouts a week, drastically reduced calories, and completely stopped using performance-enhancing drugs, which remained the case until I returned to competition over 10 years later. Fortunately, I had been steadily advancing in my career and I was now managing the 600-unit apartment community where I had started out as a maintenance man. When I finally pulled my head out of the sand and I looked around, I began to see opportunities that I would never have been able to pursue previously under my rigid competition schedule. I took an opportunity to manage a large portfolio of multifamily properties in Colorado. It was 10% of the entire portfolio for a $1 billion real estate investment trust. Now, these were very expensive assets that were losing money, so the stakes were high. They had burned through 5 managers in 3 years. I poured myself into that challenge the same way I did bodybuilding, and I achieved profitability in less than a year. This is why I often say that any bodybuilder or powerlifter that's competed at a high level in the sport already has all the tools necessary to be successful in business, because the tools are the same: consistency, discipline, hard work, and time management. The same method I used to design and track my diet, meal prep, and training, I also used for budgeting and cash flow projections for a $100 million portfolio of properties. It was just a larger spreadsheet, same result. By this time, I'd whittled my way down from over 280 pounds to under 230 pounds. I was still lifting 2 to 3 times a week and was very active and on my feet most of the day, and I felt great. I later accepted a position as vice president of a telecommunications company in Seattle, and this marks a time in my life where I learned a very important lesson about how critical your health is to your success. This was a very demanding position for a startup company. I'd wake up at 4 a.m. to be in the office by 5 and manage the call center from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., then wrap up the books and head home at 8. This went on for over 2 years, during which time I didn't train at all. I was eating like shit and I was sleeping less than 5 hours a night. My weight dropped down to almost 200 pounds and I was miserable. I was tired and I looked and felt terrible. The business was a success, but I was terrible, and I had to make a change. So I drew from that experience and I started my own telecommunications company. But I continued on the same path of 16-hour workdays and no exercise. Now I no longer had an income, and I was in major debt from startup costs. I shared an apartment and I ate McDonald's dollar menu meals for breakfast and lunch every day for a year. And dinner was college food, top ramen or mac and cheese. As the business started slowly generating some revenue, I read a book that I still remember by Jim Lohr called Stress for Success. I was looking for methods to manage stress because I was such a hot mess. I was tired, weak, and my productivity was suffering. Take a wild guess what the entire book was about. Yep, getting adequate sleep on a consistent schedule, eating a healthy diet, and exercising regularly. That was it. Go figure. That's the day I woke up from my self-imposed coma, joined the gym, and got my diet and sleep in order. And I immediately started feeling better, and I've been that way ever since. I built that business into a $25 million company and went on to build, buy, and sell over $60 million in real estate. The point of the story is that I've been there, and I do understand that it's a lot easier said than done. I absolutely believe you can be great at anything, but you can't be great at everything. And that's why it becomes more and more difficult to achieve higher and higher levels of success in one arena without more and more sacrifice in another. A healthy balance is important, but can be difficult to achieve. When I make recommendations about diet and training programs for competitive athletes, I design what I feel is the best possible program without any consideration for financial or time constraints. And from there, we have to decide what sacrifices can and cannot be made to get as close as possible to meeting the demands of the program. But for non-competitors who just want to lose weight or feel healthier, I do just the opposite. I design a program that has as little impact as possible on their preferred lifestyle and food choices. Since consistency is the single most important factor for success, I make sure the program isn't burdensome or distasteful and try and make it as convenient and enjoyable as possible. Now let's get back to my current state of hypocrisy. And if you don't hate me already, you will after I tell you the rest of this story. With unlimited time and resources, in 2008, I mapped out a plan to pursue an IFBB Pro card and set world records in powerlifting. On paper, it initially included 4 specific areas that I had to optimize, which later became 5. In no particular order of importance: training, eating, sleeping, and hormones. And the 5th I added later was rehab. Now, I've talked a lot about some of these things, and I'll go into the others in more detail in future rants. But for the purpose of this rant, I just want to go over the time and expense associated with each of them. When it came to training, I wanted to work with the best, so I trained with Flex Wheeler. Initially, we worked together for many months via phone and email, but that was just to prepare me for the training we would do together. It wasn't cheap, but it was well worth the investment. I flew down to San Jose and I moved into a Staybridge Suites right next to the gym, which are like apartments with full kitchens, and I stayed there for over 2 months. Much like a fighter brings in sparring partners, I felt I needed a savage training partner to push me to my limit, so I brought in the hardest working guy I know, Keith Williams. We had a 2-bedroom place which cost $200 a night. While we were there, we trained with Flex twice a day, 6 days a week for over 2 months. He charged me less than half his normal rate, but that was still another $200 a day, and if you're doing the math, just housing and training for 2 months was $24 grand. Then there was the diet. And as you know, Flex turned me on to the benefits of steak as opposed to eating chicken, fish, or even hamburger. And he had us eating 6 meals a day with 10 ounces of steak and 2 meals a day with 10 ounces of chicken, along with our rice, potatoes, and veggies. That's almost 4 pounds of top sirloin steak a day for each of us. At $8 a pound, that's another $2 grand in just steak. As for sleep, most of the time I slept close to 9 hours a night from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. and took 2 20 to 30 minute naps a day, one after each workout after I ate. So there's 10 hours of sleeping, 3 hours of training, and 4 hours of eating a day. Then there was the rehab, which included an hour of daily deep tissue treatments and twice a week active release therapy. There's another $150 a day. We're now over 30 grand and 18 hours a day for training, eating, sleeping, and rehab, which became 19 hours the last 30 days when we added posing and tanning to our schedule. This isn't unique to bodybuilders. Most athletes competing at a very high level subject themselves to a very demanding schedule of training and recovery. I call it becoming a victim of your own circumstance. You're essentially imprisoned by the demands of your body in order to perform at an elite level. If you don't give it what it needs, it will not give you what you need. Take away an hour of sleep, or one of the meals, or a day of training, and your performance may suffer. Lastly was hormone optimization, which is obviously a critical component not just for competing, but also for general health. As you know from previous rants, I'm a big fan of regular blood tests to identify hormone and vitamin deficiencies and many other potential health concerns. I've been consulting HRT doctors for over 10 years and getting monthly blood tests, which are additional expenses that many athletes won't or can't afford. Of course, competitive bodybuilders and powerlifters regularly use much larger doses and a greater variety of compounds than the standard HRT therapy, which is all the more reason to get regular blood tests. Fortunately, Flex has always been very conservative with his protocols, which I'll go into greater detail in a future rant, but suffice it to say that these are additional expenses. Add in the travel to Gold's Gym in Venice and Bev Francis's gym in New York for photo shoots and videos, as well as the cost of the trip to the show itself for Flex, Keith, and I, and the grand total was north of 40 grand. I followed this up with 2 months of training with Mark Bell at Super Training Gym in Sacramento. with most of the same expenses, except I paid Mark less than half what I paid Flex, but don't tell him that. That brings up another myth. I often get credited with having competed in bodybuilding and powerlifting at the same time, which I didn't. When I was training for a bodybuilding show with Flex, I didn't do a single squat, bench, or deadlift for months, and most of my rep ranges were in the 20s. When I trained for a powerlifting meet, I gained 30 to 40 pounds and did mostly singles and doubles. I always specialized for at least 8 to 12 weeks, depending on what I was preparing for. Of course, the cost of it all was astronomical and largely unnecessary, but you can't argue with the results. I earned my IFBB Pro card with Flex and set a world record in powerlifting with Mark. And the lessons I learned and relationships that were forged paid dividends for many years to come. I was featured in, sponsored by, and wrote for Muscular Development Magazine, Flex Magazine, and Power Magazine. I was invited to compete in and ultimately won the Mr. Olympia World's Strongest Bodybuilder, and I've been invited to conduct seminars all over the world. Without Flex Wheeler and Mark Bell, none of that ever would have happened. Since then, I've taken advantage of the opportunity to expand my knowledge and experience, and I've worked either directly or indirectly with many of the best trainers in the bodybuilding and powerlifting world, such as the time I spent in Chicago training with Eddie Cohn and the Lily Bridges, the time I spent in Venice training with Charles Glass, working with Chris Aceto when I trained with Gabe Moan, and Oscar when I trained with Keith Williams. I've also worked with Dave Palumbo, and Hani was always helpful with advice when asked. So when I'm conducting a seminar and I've spent an hour talking about the things I've learned and those that I think are necessary to optimize performance, and a lady raises her hand and says she's a nurse that works 12-hour shifts and a single mom with 2 kids on a tight budget and wants to know how she can possibly do all the things I've recommended, there's a long, uncomfortable silence as I'm once again reminded what a hypocrite I am. Don't get me wrong. Many athletes that have achieved as much or more than I have with less time and fewer resources. But I have to be honest about my experience. Now that I'm almost 50 and I look back on everything, I see what investments and sacrifices provided me the greatest returns. And that's one great thing I've learned about being retired. It may be twice as hard to gain, but it's only half as hard to maintain. I can retain nearly 90% of my peak performance and lean body mass with about 10% of the time and effort. It's all about consistency. Having come full circle, now I only train 3 days a week, and I rarely eat more than 4 meals a day. I have a wife, a stepson, a niece, a 4-year-old daughter, a 2-year-old son, and my 86-year-old dad that I care for. And the whole family eats less than I did by myself when I was competing. I rarely get over 7 hours of sleep, and with kids, naps are a thing of the past. My health is paramount to me now, so I maintain a much lighter body weight, and I keep myself under 10% body fat year-round using HIIT training methods, such as 20-rep sets, weighted carries, timed rest periods, and I sprint stairs and do bike sprints. My doctor-supervised HRT is comparatively modest protocol at 200 milligrams of testosterone a week. Although I have to admit the occasional photo shoot does prompt me to toss in some Winstrol just for the cameras, but don't tell my doctor. My blood pressure and blood work is normal, including my kidney and liver enzymes, my blood sugars, my cholesterol, my prostate-specific antigens, and my C-reactive protein. I've been religiously following the diet and supplementation device I've spoken about in previous rants, and I haven't had so much as a sniffle since last fall when I was feeling run down, which I discussed in the vitamin D rant. I rarely do anything superficial and temporary anymore when it comes to my training, diet, and supplementation. If it's not convenient and sustainable within the demands of my work and my family, then I don't do it. When I was training with Flex, he said something I'll never forget, and I've often repeated. When I would ask him his opinion on many of the things bodybuilders do for competition, Flex warned me about pushing the envelope. He would say, "You don't own it." Flex believed that the workload drove the process, and the sleeping, eating, and hormones just allowed you to work harder. He believed the quick gains were the first to go. At the end of the day, it's all unsustainable, which is essentially the same thing Joe Rogan said when he compared bodybuilding to making a sandcastle. Eventually, the tide comes in and washes it all away. Was it all worth it? Only you will be able to decide that for yourself when you look back at your own sacrifices and successes. Well, that's my rant, and as always, thanks for listening.